Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Tips for Managing Psychosocial Hazards at Work. My name is Alana Rafter and with me today is Sam Cahill.
Thanks Alana, it's great to be here.
We're both Senior Associates at Australian Business Lawyers and Advisors, and we're excited to be talking about this very interesting topic, would you say, Sam?
I'd agree. I think it's interesting and it's probably the most topical topic that we have in workplace relations right now. So it's great to be doing a webinar on it.
And what we really hope to achieve with today is to give you some clarity in this space, because we've received a lot of questions from everyone today, and thank you for sending them through. We've listened, we've incorporated as many as we can into here. And the common theme is there's still a little bit of confusion around this topic. So we're going to start simple with why psychological health and safety is so important for businesses and why some urgent action is required. Then we're going to tackle the topic itself. What are these psychosocial hazards? What's the mystery? Hopefully remove it. And then what we're going to do for the balance of the presentation is really focus on giving you practical tips to tackle risk management in this space. So how do you identify these hazards? How do you select control measures? And rest assured, we will be addressing the new regulation in Victoria, the differences, and essentially what you need to make all of that to be compliant. And then after we set out those differences, we'll also give you some information about support for business in this space. But let's get started talking about psychological health and safety. There's been a bit of a shift in the safety space, hasn't there, Sam?
Exactly. I think certainly there has been a lot of publicity about this topic, and for many people it's something new, or at least it's language that they have not heard before. I think from a legal perspective, this is not really a radical departure from the work health and safety law that we have known for decades and decades. The reason I say that is that for lifetimes now, employers have had an obligation to protect the safety of workers at work, and that has never really excluded mental health or psychological safety. Really what was lacking in the past was a real attention on this topic, especially on the part of safety regulators. So it is certainly possible that if you were to go back maybe 10, 15, 20 years and have one of your workers call up a safety regulator and say, look, I'm stressed at work, I don't have clarity on my job role, my boss wants to performance manage me, I'm feeling very stressed. There's every chance that a safety regulator would have said, look, that's not actually a safety issue, we don't have the time and resources to deal with that. I think if you fast forward to today, there's every chance that you're going to get a very different response from a safety regulator. They're all saying that this topic of mental health at work or psychosocial safety is now a priority for them. They have the time, they have the money to deal with it. And so there's every chance that in that scenario today, you'll get much more of a response, and in some cases you can even get a safety inspector showing up at the workplace, knocking on the door and asking management, look, what are you doing to manage psychosocial safety at work?
And we have seen that in recent time in the news with some big name universities that will remain nameless, but you all know who we're talking about in that space. But the safety regulators are taking this very seriously. And I'd be more blunt in talking about psychological health, that if you weren't doing anything before those express obligations have been introduced, you already probably weren't compliant in this space because the duty was broad enough to already require you to take that action. But now that we've given the warning about how important it is, let's remove some of that mystery. Now, if you find yourself getting very confused with the psychosocial hazard, particularly the word psychosocial, feel free, we'll give you permission right now, to throw out that word and give it a more accessible, use more accessible language, like mental health hazard, psychological hazard. If that helps you start this conversation at work and with your workers, please feel free to use that, because safety should not be this exclusive activity. It needs to be accessible to everyone. And what we're talking about at the end of the day are risks to psychological health. They're hazards in the workplace that can cause psychological harm.
Exactly. And I think one way of thinking about what is a psychosocial hazard is really to think of these as things in the workplace that can be stressful for workers. And it may be a little bit more technical than that, so I'll let you take us through the technical definition.
But we do have stress at the center of the slide there, so we will talk about it. But what you see on the left there with the blue sphere, this is the source of these hazards. This is where they come from in the workplace. They relate to, arise from, or factors in connection to the way in which you design or manage work. So the way you performance manage, that could be a source of these hazards. Plant at the workplace, so we're talking about your vehicles, appliances, equipment, all of that stuff. The work environment itself, one of the most common ones would be remote or isolated work, but also factors such as noise in the work environment. That can also give rise to risks to psychological health. And then, of course, one of the more simpler ones to grasp would be workplace interactions or behaviours. If you take no interventions with respect to how someone should conduct themselves, this can give rise to bullying, discrimination, harassment. But what do all those hazards have in common is they generate stress. They cause a stress response, or to use the new Victorian language, a negative psychological response. Now let's be really clear. Stress is not the injury that you need to eliminate. When we're talking about these hazards, I do not want anyone getting confused that stress is the injury. No. Stress is the vehicle which can take someone to injury. And that injury could be psychological harm or physical harm, or both in some areas. And I'm talking about like musculoskeletal disorder, psychiatric disorders, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, all of that. Now, how do you get there from the hazard to injury? It's that frequent, prolonged or severe exposure to stress. So that's where all your interventions, your control measures that we're going to be focusing on today, that's what they're tackling. They're trying to reduce that frequency, that prolonged exposure, the severity there, to minimize someone going all the way across to injury.
Exactly. So we're not talking about running a day spa that's completely stress-free for all workers. So stress is probably an inherent part of work and being part of an organisation. So we're not talking about eliminating stress, but we are talking about managing psychosocial hazards. And stress is really the way we identify a psychosocial hazard. And I think to go into that definition a little bit further, there's a huge range of types of psychosocial hazards. And so they can arise in different ways, like Alana was saying. It can be from the work itself, it can be how the organisation is managed, or it can be due to interactions between different people within the organisation. And I think if you were to talk to someone and if they said to you that they're really stressed about work and you ask them why they're stressed, they might rattle off a whole list of examples. Things like, look, no one knows what they're meant to be doing. I work with someone who is a big bully. People are being thrown under the bus for things they didn't do. They may not realise it, but what they're actually doing is listing a bunch of psychosocial hazards. And so I think the point I like to make about this term is that it's not really a new thing. It's not new to the world. Really, it's a new name for something that most people know already and understand. And I mean understanding in the practical sense of if you talk to someone who's stressed, chances are they're stressed for one of these reasons.
And then we have a list of those more common psychosocial hazards on the slide for you there. And I hope that really echoes what Sam is saying, that these are not new hazards that no one knows about. As you read them, you're likely realizing, oh, I actually know a lot about these and can recognize signs of these in the workplace. And an additional tip we would say with respect to the ones that are boldened there is that these hazards can interact. So if you have a workplace where you're not doing things about high job demands, you have no role clarity, there's poor procedural justice, it's a very it's very arbitrary in the way it follows its processes. This can give rise to a lot of dissatisfaction amongst workers and those harmful behaviours you see under the people stuff category of these hazards, so bullying, poor workplace relationships.
Exactly. And it's such a broad term, isn't it? And so you can see from that list on the previous slide that you have all of these examples, some of which are directly within the control of management. So management can control, for example, procedural justice or workloads or the policies that it has. But then you have other examples that are maybe a little bit beyond the control of management. So management can't, at the end of the day, management can't actually control how other people behave at work, but it can be something where management can take steps to minimise the risks associated with that behaviour. So it's one thing to get your head around that it's a very broad term and it includes a lot of different things, things that may be within our control or maybe a little bit outside of our control, but they all fall under this very broad term.
So now we're going to turn to risk management. So Sam, do you want to set out what the psychosocial risk management framework is? It different? Is it new? What are we talking about here?
Well, this one is not, I would say it's not new. And I think for anyone who's dabbled in work health and safety law, they would be familiar with the little wheel logo that you can see on our screen on the right-hand side there. So that represents a process that we call the risk management process. And to go through it very quickly, we start with identifying hazards. We move to assessing the risk associated with those hazards. So how likely is this to materialise? What would be the consequences if it did materialise? And then we get into control measures. So what are we going to do to actually eliminate this hazard? Or if we can't do that, what are we going to do to minimise it? And the end there is about reviewing the effectiveness of those control measures. So are they working? Are there other things that we could do to minimise the risk? And then we go back to step one. So this is a continual process. It's not a one-off exercise. And the reason for that is that we can always improve on work health and safety. We always have potentially new hazards that arise. And also there are potentially new ways of controlling those risks. And so that is why this is not something we just do today and forget about. It's an active process we need to be engaging in all the time. The other thing about the risk management process is that throughout the process, we are required to consult with workers, the workers who are affected by the hazards. And that is a legal requirement. It is also something that can be very useful for this process because at the end of the day, it is those workers who are exposed to these hazards, and it's the workers who know the workplace. They know what could potentially be done to address risks in the workplace. And so really what we need to be doing and what we should be doing is talking to workers throughout this process at every stage to get their input and to get their feedback. That can be through a formal exercise like a survey of workers, or it could be something informal like just going up to a worker and asking them about their job, what are the hazards, what are we doing to make the workplace safe.
And one of the questions we received was targeting consultation. They're saying, when do we need to engage in consultation when it comes to psychosocial risk and psychological health and safety? And in that, I think we can give you two very quick answers. One will be before you're making a decision that may affect the psychological health and safety of workers. That should be a trigger for we need to consult with them. But also with every step that Sam's just set out, consult with your workers, and that can be as simple as engaging in a conversation with them because they will have that invaluable feedback there and hopefully help you enhance your compliance. And there's some very not so subtle foreshadowing there that there are some specific considerations when it comes to controlling risks in this space. But hopefully looking at that framework, you'll be put at ease with the familiarity that's there. The same steps that we follow with physical hazards are being followed in this space, but there are some additional things to be aware of when it comes to controlling those risks, and we will highlight those.
Exactly. It's not a new method or a new system. It's really the same principles that are now being applied to mental health.
So how to identify psychosocial hazards. We had some debate between us and we've come up with the 4 tips, and there's some bonus tips that Sam will highlight as well. But the biggest tip, and this is what all the safety regulators set out in their codes of practice, their compliance codes, start with the common psychosocial hazards. So that list we had at the outset, you don't need to start from scratch here. They're common for a reason, because they're reasonably foreseeable in the majority of workplaces. So start with those common hazards and consider, do these arise in my workplace? And as you can see in that orange box on the bottom of the screen, there's multiple ways you can approach this. Maybe your business is small, so you approach that from a whole workforce point of view. Maybe you have lots of teams, divisions, different sites, so you approach it site by site, team by team. But start with that list. It can get you started and remove some of the intimidation in this space.
That's right. I mean, a lot of the work has been done for us when it comes to identifying psychosocial hazards. And so we can really leverage all the material that is out there. And it's not just any old people putting out this material, it's the safety regulators themselves who are publishing guides and codes of practice that set out the common psychosocial hazards in all workplaces. So I think it's a wonderful starting point when we set off on this journey, is to look at the material that is out there.
And then as you go through the next few steps that we have listed there, these hopefully look familiar as well, as you can apply these with respect to physical hazards. So make observations of your workplace. A walk through the workplace can be a fantastic way for you to potentially identify more hazards in this space. And this is where you could be looking for signs of stress. Consult with workers. I know that's a passion point for you.
My passionate topic. I think this is where consultation really comes in. Just talking to people, asking them about their job. How do they feel? Is it under control? Is it out of control? What makes it stressful? I think, in my experience, people are more than happy to tell you about the things that make their jobs stressful. So another great resource when it comes to identifying these hazards.
And then, of course, we identify any vulnerable workers. And these, again, they're the same categories that we apply in physical hazards. So language barriers, cognitive difficulties, but also be wary of young workers, those that are new to the workforce or those that have taken a break from the workforce. They may have some additional vulnerabilities that we may need to assess separately and think of some additional controls to support them to minimise the risk of harm to them.
Exactly, and there's been a lot of research done on types of people who may be more vulnerable to things like bullying or sexual harassment or discrimination. And so if we look at that sort of information that is out there and then look at our own workforce, we can probably get some ideas about, okay, here are some key hazards for us.
And then, of course, review and collect your data, always a great source. You're collecting data all the time, whether it be absenteeism data, leave data, and incident reports and complaints as well. All of this can give you insight.
Workers' comp is another one. If you look back over your workers' comp claims history, you may get some insights into the sorts of things that people are at least claiming workers' comp for.
And now I think it's a good time to turn to one of the most important parts of this risk management process, which is how do you select control measures? Now, we're going to do a little bit of theory. I know lawyers talking about law and theory, but a little bit, and then we'll break it down into specific hazards. We've heard you. We will get to the examples.
Don't be alarmed.
But what we wanted to do was identify and address that there are 2 formulations now about how you need to select control measures. The second one has arisen out of Victoria, but starting with the majority recognises that you need to follow the hierarchy of controls, and that's the same type of procedure you follow with physical hazards. You ask, can I eliminate the hazard? If I can't, can I substitute it? Can I introduce an engineering control to minimize risks? And you go down that hierarchy. But with psychosocial hazards, they also require you to consider additional considerations, such as, can I make changes to the system of work, design of work, things of that nature, and we'll set out the full list a little later. Victoria, earlier in this month, introduced a new process, a new modified hierarchy of controls for psychosocial hazards. Now, we've spent the past couple of weeks, because they were only released a couple of weeks ago, looking at these hierarchies, and we've come to the conclusion that there's some decent alignment there. So because both approaches recognise a hierarchy, the key message that employees need to take away from all approaches across Australia is that there are some more effective control measures in this space that you should be prioritising, and there are some less effective ones.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think certainly the hierarchy, the upside down triangle, and all the categories within that, it works very well for physical hazards, especially things like machinery. There's a hole in the floor, whatever it might be. You can really see how when you're addressing that physical hazard, there are those different approaches. Some are clearly more effective than others. When we get onto psychosocial hazards, sometimes those categories don't apply as neatly as they do in relation to physical hazards. But I think, as Alana was saying, the key thing to keep in mind is that not all control measures are equal. There are some that are more effective than others, and it's the more effective control measures that we need to prioritise.
And we did receive some questions about how do we approach the hierarchy of controls in this topic, because as you said, it can be a bit difficult or intimidating to identify engineering controls for to minimise risks to psychological health. That can seem like a very difficult exercise. But what we recommend and what the legislation sets out is it points you to these 5 categories and says, ask a simple question. What change can I make to the design of work? Can I implement a process so that more experienced staff do the task? Can I introduce definitions of the roles, so position descriptions, and make sure that each role in the business knows precisely what responsibilities fall within that role? When we look at systems of work, is there a formal procedure or process I can establish in this business to minimise risks to psychological health? So if there are high job demands, a common one is task rotation. Can I break up the work, and that works for low job demands as well, I should say, and breaks and rostering to address fatigue in the workplace? And then when you go down these categories, plant and work environment, we're starting to actually look at engineering controls. Can we install sound dampening technology? That could be to address noise in the workplace, which can present a risk to psychological health. So focus on these categories when you're trying to brainstorm as many different controls for a psychosocial hazard as you can, because these are the ones you need to prioritise due to that hierarchy concept. But then if we move down the line, the more less effective, here's where we get. Now, less effective does not mean you should throw these out the window, particularly when it comes to information, training and instruction. That can be such a valuable control measure in this space. And I'm sure many of you listening know you have duties to provide all necessary information, training, instruction to keep workers safe as well. So definitely not saying throw this out. But the reason we're putting it in this second tier here is a lot of the driving forces from the new psychological health regulations in Victoria. They've now, as of 1 December this year, there will be 2 conditions that apply in Victoria. Information, training or instruction cannot be used as an exclusive control measure unless you are satisfied none of these more effective control measures are available. And that's a pretty high bar to satisfy. And the reason they're doing this is they don't want businesses simply providing training and calling it a day. What you need to be approaching psychological health risks with is this combination approach, trying to see how many control measures you can think of, because at the end of the day, the duty is to reduce the risk so far as reasonably practicable. So in short, let's make sure we have more in these categories, and these are more supplementary for the majority of the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's the idea is to take a very broad view of what can be done to address these issues, rather than the sort of tick a box. Okay, here's your policy, here's your training. The question that the law requires us to ask is, well, what else can we do?
And now that we've done the theory is there for you to look at back on as well. We'll contextualize it. We're going to go through 5 or 6, I can't remember the number, but we're going to see how many we can go through and give you specific practical tips for those hazards. Starting right off with bullying. Sam, I'll let you kickstart off bullying.
Well, bullying, I mean, we've been talking about bullying for a decade or so. So the safe work guidance material on workplace bullying is coming up to a decade old. And so a lot of us are very familiar with the sorts of things that we should be doing in terms of preventing and responding to workplace bullying. And so on the prevention side, this is fairly straightforward. We need very good policies, and we need to train people regularly on those policies. We need a commitment from the very top of the organisation that bullying is not tolerated within the organisation. We need that to be actually demonstrated by management and supervisors. They need to be the role models for a workplace that is free of bullying. And all this stuff is very well known. It's been set out in safe work guidance material for about a decade. Some other things are having reporting avenues for people who may be experiencing bullying. And then we get into how to respond to bullying or reports of workplace bullying. And so these are measures that can be taken potentially after bullying has occurred and after it's been brought to the attention of the employer. And so again...
Oh, I almost cut you off,
Oh
Sam.
no, you go.
But all those control measures that you're saying, I hope that they sound very familiar to everyone and have put them at ease, because you've essentially listed a combination of control measures. And those first 4 in particular, they're really drawing upon those more effective control measure category. And then the ones in blue at the bottom of the slide, these are the ones that we're supplementing those control measures with to really minimise risk. And that is the provision of information and training to managers and to workers so that everyone knows their role in this space. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, am I exposed to risk in this area? A business that simply has a anti-bullying policy that sits on the shelf, hides in the intranet, you never train, you never talk about it, it's just there for looks. Okay, that's a business that needs to look at this slide and review its control measures in this space, because essentially we want to move away from just a one document approach, just relying on some online training. We're doing much more. There's a system of work, a formal procedure is being established.
Yeah, exactly. And work health and safety is all about being proactive about these things. So the example we had in blue on the previous slide is a great example. Just because so many complaints about bullying are actually complaints about management action. And so a wonderful example of being proactive about this issue is actually training your managers on how to carry out reasonable management action. So yeah, it's that type of thinking where we're not being so narrow, we're not just saying, okay, policy and training, we're thinking more broadly about what can be done to actually stop this from happening.
And this same thing, this same combination of response, you're going to see it through each of these hazards we talk about. Now, we had lots of questions about performance management. Looking at it right now, we have managers are concerned about addressing poor behaviour, poor performance, worried it could lead to a psychosocial complaint. So now worried to take action in this space. But before addressing that question, I will say that we definitely don't want you to be in this spot. A reactive business that starts to think it's more safe to do nothing. because that's just going to increase your risk of non-compliance in this space. And a reactive business is one that has no established procedures, you make it up as you go, no management training, none of that, it's all inconsistent. If that's your business, we need to take some steps to review our processes because one, you're at risk of being non-compliant and you're likely putting your workers at risk as well. So with your performance management and your approach there, we want to see you more in this space. A proactive business, as Sam was talking about, where you have those established procedures, clear communication, consistent application of procedures by managers, but also having regard to case-by-case considerations. That's the space we want to be in. Now, will having this proactive approach completely abolish people making complaints, Sam? Will it end that? Is it the silver bullet?
Certainly not. I don't think there's anything that can be done to actually stop people making complaints.
That's right.
If someone has a grievance, chances are they're going to make a complaint. What we need to do from a legal perspective is get ourselves in a position where we can easily address that complaint. So before we had psychosocial hazards, this concern already existed. So back then the concern was if we manage someone, they'll allege that we're bullying them. And really it's the same thing now, only the language has changed to, well, if we manage someone, they will allege that we are creating a psychosocial hazard. So it's a little bit more wordy now, but essentially it's the same thing. And the only way you can really deal with that is, like I said, we can't stop that complaint from being made, but we can get ourselves to a point where we can say, look, you've raised this concern. Here are the things that we do to protect your psychological safety. And so if we've been proactive and we've developed a system, or whatever it might be, with those things in mind, we will be able to deal with that scenario.
And when a complaint is being investigated, so say it's alleged that the way you're managing performance is putting workers' psychological health at risk, you'd review all the processes that are currently being applied. What systems exist? How are managers approaching this? And you're looking to answer that question, is the business doing what is reasonably practicable to minimise the risk of psychological harm? And how do you do that? By those, you see examples in that green box there. Those are the control measures that are seeking to minimise that risk of harm. And then, of course, to answer the workers' comp inquiry, have you engaged in reasonable management action? And that closes off that. So we can't stop the complaint, but we can help hopefully minimise your exposure to a complaint being sustained or established.
And in case anyone hasn't heard this before, when it comes to performance management, we just need to make sure that it's reasonable management action. And so there are two parts to that. One is making sure that we have a reasonable basis to take action. So if we're saying that someone has poor performance, we need to be very clear on exactly what areas of their performance are unsatisfactory and probably have specific examples that are well established. And then once we're comfortable with that, it's really about conducting the process in a manner that is reasonable. And so often there we need to be considerate of the employee and just do simple things like have conversations in private, offer them a support person, be supportive, talk about how you want their performance to improve, how you're going to support them to help them improve, to focus on those things. If we can get those basics right, I think you're in a very good position to deal with any sort of complaints about psychosocial hazards.
And all of those concepts, I anticipate, Sam, you're going to say apply in this context as well, because another stressful activity in the work environment is workplace investigations, and you've done many. You're one of the experts at ABLA on this. I'm going to put it out there.
Thank you very
much. One
of
the experts on this topic. But how do you ensure your approach to workplace investigations is having regard to ensuring psychological health? What should people be focusing on?
It's a very good point, because a little bit like performance management, workplace investigations are naturally stressful. They're stressful for virtually everyone involved, whether they're the complainant, a witness or someone who is responding to allegations. And so I think a lot of employers already know that instinctively, especially if they've been through the process before. And we also know about what can be done to minimize or at least manage that level of stress. And so simple things like maintaining communication with everyone involved, offering support to everyone involved, to do it as promptly as possible, to notify people of the outcome. And a lot of this stuff is, it's captured by what we have on the screen about transparency and supporting people. Another thing, if we step back a little bit when it comes to workplace investigations, a little bit like what I was saying about performance management, we need to be sure, with performance management, we need to be sure that there is a performance problem. With workplace investigations, it's not like we're going to rush into an investigation for every single issue that comes up. There are lots of ways of addressing complaints and concerns. It could be as simple as having a conversation, it could be a mediation, there could be some informal option. But in some circumstances, we may need to conduct a formal investigation. And this is where the stress levels tend to go up a notch. So if we go back a little bit, I think a key thing in terms of managing people's psychosocial health or their exposure to stress, a key thing is going to be, with investigations, making a judgment call on whether an investigation is the right way of dealing with a particular issue. And so usually you're looking at a scenario, a common scenario where you do need an investigation is one where it's a fairly complex issue. The parties involved do not agree about what allegedly happened. Maybe there is no one within the organisation who has the expertise to carry out this sort of investigation, so you might need someone external. They are a few of the ingredients that you might look for if you're then going to make a decision, well, okay, let's conduct an investigation. Once you've crossed that threshold, we still need to keep in mind all of that stuff I was saying before: timeliness, support, confidentiality, communication with all those parties. Keep in mind all of those things while we conduct the investigation. And if we can tick all of those boxes, we can still do this. We can still conduct investigations. We just need to do it safely. I think that's the key point here. It's not that we're trying to scare you off these processes. We just need to acknowledge that they do create stress for people, and we need to acknowledge that us as employers or managers, we are the ones with the duty to try and minimise that stress.
And a proactive way that we can then take everything you just said on board would be, even before we have an investigation or a complaint to investigate, we establish a procedure for how we're going to approach workplace investigations. It notes that sometimes informal mechanisms or an informal approach may be preferable to the situation, and that should be flexible enough to allow for that, and address those other elements on the slide there that you were talking about. But I think this is a good question to address here, Sam. But what if a worker says they don't want this issue investigated? What about their worries about their psychological health? They're worried it's going to cause them too much stress, and they don't want you to do it.
Yeah, it's a classic dilemma. And I have seen this happen on many occasions. You have a worker come forward and say, look, I don't want you to do anything. I just want you to know X. Now, I think a lot of managers are fairly torn in that situation because they want to do the right thing by the worker, they want to do the right thing by the organisation, they want to do the right thing by themselves. I think certainly as someone who advises businesses on compliance with workplace laws, my advice is that if an issue has come to light and it's serious, the manager really has an overriding responsibility to actually address that concern. And it may mean doing something that the complainant doesn't actually want us to do, but in the circumstances it is the right thing to do and the legally correct thing to do. One other thing I would say about that is that it doesn't mean we're simply disregarding someone who says, look, don't investigate this issue. because the investigation can still be done in a way that minimises stress or discomfort to that individual. It's not about disregarding their feelings or anything like that. It's just acknowledging that there's maybe considerations that are more weighty, that weigh in favour of taking action.
And this is a space where you'd want that difficult question to be addressed in training to managers so that they know they have to do something about that and not just file it away and never talk about it. Next hazard, working from home. Every WHS presentation we do, we get questions about remote work and working from home. Today's key hazard is the working from home. So remote or isolated work is, of course, a hazard to someone's psychological health, and it can arise in different ways. And it's important to recognise that it's not going to be the same in every situation. So someone that works from home 100% of the time will have a different level or exposure to risk than someone that's hybrid or someone that has not doing it at all. So appreciating those differences is important, but here's a list of example control measures that we find tend to apply to most situations when you're working from home.
It's wonderful. I mean, this will be different for different workers, as you say, Alana. I think one way to think about this is that if you think about all of your workers who are physically present in your workplace, so the office or the workshop or the factory or whatever it is, and you think about all the things that you do to look after their well-being or their mental health. So you make sure that they're not overloaded with work, you support them, you have communication with them, you make sure they're taking breaks. All of these things that we just naturally do as management. And then you think about a worker who is doing that same work but out of sight. So they're at home, they're at another location. And really what you have to do is think about how can we keep doing all these things that we normally do? How can we keep providing support, supervision, communication? How can we check their workload and their work hours and their breaks? How can we do that for someone who is no longer physically present? And that is a challenge for businesses, a lot of businesses in this day and age. And the way they answer that question will be different depending on their workforce or the individuals, the management, the technology that they want to use. But it's really, a lot of this is about turning our minds to that question and trying to come up with an answer.
And then an example of a system of work you must address in these situations is on the slide there. Set up a system for regular communication with that worker. And we've put some prompts there for you to think about, like how will the manager or supervisor communicate with that worker? And that should obviously be communicated to the worker as well. How is the worker to contact the business if there's a problem? What are they to do? And are there forms of structured communication and more informal communication as well? Now, this system for regular communication is an additional duty that's imposed upon the business. So make sure that system of work is there. And I think now's a good time to try another hazard, high job demands. There was a bit of a debate between us whether we should address high job demands, low job demands. Given the time of year and clients in the retail service, which are about to increase in their job demands, we thought this is a good one to address head on.
I personally think this is more stressful than low job demands, but I may be wrong, I don't know.
Oh, different type of stress response, different type. But don't neglect low job demands. But here's a lot of examples for you to think about. And these are, again, drawing upon those topics of work design, management of work, systems of work. That's where they're all drawn from. And I hope you get from the list that they're not all too complicated. So provide adequate time to perform tasks within allocated work hours. Ensure that there are adequate breaks between shifts. This is work design that it's ensuring that we're not increasing the risk of fatigue. So it's a form of fatigue management, really. Setting achievable targets, that's another one that's often connected to high job demands. But as you go down the line, you'll see that what these control measures are trying to do is make you more conscious and intentional in your approach to certain procedures. So appreciating that risk to psychological health can arise, for example, in our approach to recruitment, if it's done thoughtlessly or without consideration for the resources we're actually trying to fill and obtain. And that's why we say recruitment processes are informed by skills, qualifications, and experience required by the business. And of course, Sam, we have your favourite there, consult with workers.
Always consult. About any psychosocial hazard, we need to consult. I think you could sum up a lot of these control measures as just being a good manager, to be thoughtful about people's workloads. Do they have the skills and experience to take on that work? Is it too much for them? Do they need support? Do we need to think about how else are we going to do this? I mean, a lot of managers would just do this naturally or instinctively. The only thing now is that it's a legal requirement.
And it's important that managers become aware that their actions in this space, so the ways they manage work, can give rise to risk to psychological health. A lot of managers, I find, are comfortable with understanding the importance of reasonable management action, but that's usually tied to workers' compensation conversations. But we need to broaden that education there to make sure they know that their actions in their role can impact the psychological health of their workers and the team they're overseeing. Inadequate feedback or recognition. Now, this is a common psychosocial hazard. There can be easy controls to address this quite swiftly, but Sam can tell you about many stories that this pops up in investigations all the time.
Yes. I mean, I've been involved in lots of investigations where the complainant will complain about a particular issue, but once you dig down a little bit more, sometimes the thing that's really got them upset is the fact that they have done good things in their work and in their job, and maybe going back years and years of good work, and no one said anything about all their good work, but maybe something else has come up now, and straight away the boss is on to them about this bad thing. And so I think, there's a practical lesson in all of that, where if we want to pull people up for unsatisfactory performance or unsatisfactory conduct, we should also be looking at rewarding people for good performance or good conduct, which is common sense. I think this being a common psychosocial hazard and being recognised by the regulators will, I'm sure, be met by a lot of raised eyebrows out there in the business community. It probably makes workers sound a little bit soft, potentially. The idea that if they don't get a pat on the back, then they're going to suffer a mental breakdown. And I think if you put it in those terms, it may sound a little bit silly, but I think just from a common sense perspective, I think just part of being a good manager is rewarding people for good work. And what the law is now saying and what the regulators are saying is that if you don't do that, not only is it bad management, it actually creates this psychosocial risk.
And what I like about that example you gave was the connection to performance management processes and potentially even workplace investigations, where if you're not doing anything in this space to address giving feedback and recognition to workers, you can start to give rise to those performance issues that lead to the need to performance manage. So this is an important common psychosocial hazard not to overlook, because this can be, if you're not doing anything in this space, it can give rise to other hazards and other problems throughout the workplace. And as you can see, it's not the most onerous one to address.
Exactly. It's easily fixed. It's very easy to reward people. It can be a simple thank you.
And what we'd want to just see is make sure you have that combination of approach when you're addressing the risks arising from this. So yes, provide training to managers to make sure they know about this, but also think about how you can embed it into your practices overall. Conducting regular meetings, encouraging that practice of ad hoc feedback. And there's even a suggestion of recognising past performance and stating that past performance and achievements will be a factor that informs internal promotions.
And it may not always be rewards for good performance. It can just be feedback. So I think the stressor, the thing that creates stress, is potentially just not knowing how you're going as an employee. So just giving any sort of feedback can help with this one.
Now we've finished our list. And what we'll do now is just highlight those key differences between the states and territories so everyone in the different jurisdictions know what applies to them. As we said at the outset, there's a lot of language differences between Victoria and the rest of the country, but the key difference really comes down to those two conditions that are regulating the use of information, training and instruction. And they're just on the slide there to emphasise. So make sure we're not relying exclusively on information, training, instruction, unless there are none of those more effective control measures. And it shouldn't be the predominant or main control measure when we have that combination. Essentially, we want to move away from simply relying on information, training and instruction. It can be a great control measure, but let's make sure we've got a combination. With all the other states and territories, they use and refer to these additional considerations. And as promised, here they are. So the approach in those jurisdictions is consider each of these factors. Have regard to them when you're aiming to select as many control measures as you can to minimise that risk. And to align it a bit to the hierarchy, the ones in blue, if you're considering them and proposing changes, they're really getting you to those more effective control measures. We've got information, training and instruction at the top there. Again, let's make sure we're using that more in combination, not in isolation. And those considerations in orange, the duration, frequency, severity, those interaction with other psychosocial hazards, they really can inform your risk assessment of these hazards and might make you think we need to do more in this space. And then the only other difference for Tasmania at the moment, it's the only jurisdiction that says you don't have to follow the hierarchy of controls. It says just simply consider these factors.
So in Tasmania, all control measures are good, they're all equal, they should all be done.
But they do say you have to consider all relevant factors, so you must go through each factor, and that's the same approach in every jurisdiction but Victoria. Consider all of these factors.
Very good.
Some additional differences. Queensland has gone further, so I'm sure most people listening would be aware of the positive duty under the Sex Discrimination Act, but Queensland has embedded regulations about sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment into their safety regulations. And one of the key ones is if you identify that hazard in your workplace, you must prepare a prevention plan. Very important for our Queensland businesses. That's not best practice, that is an obligation you must do.
So it's gone from a should to a must in Queensland.
Yes. And then there's also a duty with respect to codes of practice. In Queensland, you have to comply with the codes of practice that are approved in that jurisdiction. And that's not exclusive to psychosocial hazards, that's all of the codes of practice, unless you can find something that's of equivalent or higher standard. And New South Wales, get ready because that duty's coming here too, as of 1 July next year. And so we have the two psychosocial hazard codes for New South Wales on the slide there. But again, that's going to apply to all approved codes of practice. So time to get familiar with those codes.
And if you do feel that there's a bit of doubling up going on, I think you're justified in feeling that way, because we've had the amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act. We've had the Human Rights Commission publish extensive material on what should be done to prevent sexual harassment and other related misconduct. And now we have the Work Health Safety Authorities chiming in with their own code of practice on what to do about the same issue.
So lots of reading for businesses out there. But if you want to find these codes, you can find them on your safety regulator's website. If you can't find them, then message us, we'll send them to you. And that's a good segue into support for business. So what we've got WHS training upcoming. I'm told that those tuning in live right now, you'll see under handouts, you'll see a bar for WHS training, and that will take you there to find out more information about that. There's also information about our psychosocial hazards toolkit there for you as well. And just to quickly show you that, there's a picture of it. This is designed to give resources to business to really help them get started on this process. So there's tools to assist you. How do we approach identifying? And even the question of how do we review these control measures or have regard to those additional factors? How do we do that? That's what that toolkit's designed to help. And would be remiss if we did not mention that there'll be a survey after this webinar. You get the chance to tell Abla how you really feel about this webinar and how
rewards and recognition
Sam and I have done.
Great performance.
But we'll turn to some questions as we received a lot. So Sam, I'll put you in the hot seat first. So let's go. Okay. What are some common mistakes that could expose managers and workplaces unnecessarily?
I will go back to my pet topic here. I think consultation. I think some people might treat this as purely a mental exercise where they sit down and read the material and then they come up with their systems and their plans or their policies and they press go and they think they're finished, but they haven't consulted. And I think that is something that can trip up a lot of very thoughtful HR practitioners, safety practitioners, managers. They do the work health and safety process without consulting. I think that's probably my number one.
I'm going to tackle it from the business end. I think some of the mistakes that could expose businesses to risk if you were relying exclusively on an employee assistance program or simply a policy on a shelf, that is not going to help your business out. If that's all you're relying on to answer psychological health and safety concerns, that combination approach is required. And also if you're a business that has no established procedures, you're just reacting to complaints as they come in, reacting to incidents, and you're effectively playing catch up on this topic. If you're in that space, we really need to move you more into that proactive space. And we've received a couple questions about what evidence do you need to provide to show you've met these obligations, or what paperwork should businesses have in case of an audit? What are some documents?
Well, you may be able to say the magic documents that are needed. I think in terms of documents, I think the key here is to actually take the steps that we need to take, and then we have documents that are a record of the steps that we have taken. So they're secondary, as in they come second, and really what they are a record of what we have done. So if the inspector ever knocks on the door, we can hold up that piece of paper and say, this is not just a piece of paper, this is a list of things we have actually done.
Yes.
Well, what are the magic documents though?
No, I want to talk to your last point first. It's so important that the records you have actually reflect what you're doing. If it's a record of what you're doing, like a risk register that shows the hazards you've identified, assessed, those control measures, that combination that we want to see, that's great. And then you can show the regulator or show the inspector what you're doing in that space. What I don't want anyone to think is that having a beautiful suite of documents, having a wonderful WHS management system that's comprehensive, addresses consultation, investigations, incidents, risk management procedure, best one a lawyer's ever read, but you don't follow it or do it. That will not save you. If your documents do not reflect your actual practice, that's not going to help you in court, in an investigation, anywhere. So please make sure your records reflect what you're doing. I think the best thing about records is if they actually reflect your practices, they can help you be confident if you ever are audited or you ever unfortunately come up against court proceedings. You can show what you're doing. And we have time for more questions, so let's see. Okay. We've received a question, and I'm not sure if we addressed it, but it's on your favourite topic and you can't make this up. How often should businesses be approaching consultation for psychosocial risks? How often do you think they should be consulting?
Oh, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think it depends on the sort of hazards you're talking about. For example, you might start doing something that you've never done before as a business. And so there are all these new hazards that arise. And so you're going to need to consult about those hazards. in terms of just regular review of the risk management that you've done before, you could have a rule of thumb. It might be a few months. Do you have any feelings on frequency of review?
Well, frequency of review, periodic is important, and ad hoc and as needed. I think that's simple. And the same processes, I guess, can apply to consultation as well. Regular consultation, but must occur before you make those decisions that could affect the health and safety of workers. And
sorry, you go.
I think we're nearly at time, unless you had another point to make.
I just didn't want to fatigue workers by always consulting with them every few months. I think you just have to take a common sense approach to that. If they've told you their thoughts on a topic, they might not want to tell you those same thoughts in 2 months' time or 3 months' time.
And of course, if you want any assistance in this area, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you there. So thank you for joining us today on this great topic, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you all. Have a good day.